Rear Admiral Raizō Tanaka leads 8 Japanese destroyers through the darkness toward Tassafaronga Point. Their holds were packed wall to wall with drums of desperately needed food and supplies for the Imperial troops clinging to survival on Guadalcanal. Without them, hope of taking back the island is doomed. On board, a tense silence fills the bridge as the ships enter Iron Bottom Sound, Guadalcanal's infamous warship graveyard. Dozens of vessels rest beneath the waves. With the majority of their torpedoes and ammunition removed to make space for the drums, Tanaka knows that if the Americans catch them, there's a good chance they'll be joining the wrecks on the seabed. Suddenly, the moonless night is bathed in harsh white light. American star shells. The lead vessel, Takanami, is exposed and vulnerable. A torrent of rounds comes hurtling toward her from the 5 cruisers and multiple destroyers of U.S. Navy's Task Force 67. Her hull punctures. Fires break out across her deck. The bridge fills with smoke as communication systems fail one by one. A mile back, Admiral Tanaka's face curls into a wry smile. Somehow, this is exactly what he wanted. These Americans fancy themselves clever, but now they have fallen into the perfect trap. The stage is set. November 30th, 1942. In the early morning, 8 Japanese destroyers slip out of port at their forward base on the Shortland Islands, just off the southeast tip of Bougainville. They are led by Rear Admiral Raizō Tanaka, one of Japan's most skilled destroyer commanders. For Takanami and Tanaka's flagship, Naganami, it's business as usual. But the other 6 vessels, instead of performing their normal function as warships, bear unusual yet essential cargo. Each of the destroyer's 8 torpedo tubes has been emptied of all but one Type 93 long-length torpedo, to make space for between 200 and 240 large oil drums per ship. The drums have all been carefully cleaned, packed with food and medical supplies, and sealed to ensure they will float. The destroyers have been ordered to sail to Tassafaronga Point on Guadalcanal's northwestern shore under cover of darkness, drop the supply-filled drums overboard, and retreat before American aircraft can attack at dawn. The plan is for Japanese soldiers ashore to then retrieve the floating supplies by pulling them to shore with ropes. For the desperate Japanese troops on Guadalcanal, these supplies represent survival. Nearly 4 months into the battle for this strategic island, they're being pushed back by advancing American forces. Without food or medicine, defeat is inevitable. Meanwhile, 580 miles southeast at Espiritu Santo Harbor in the New Hebrides, modern-day Vanuatu, another maritime force is already on its way to Tassafaronga Point, having left the night before. The U.S. Navy has assembled Task Force 67 specifically to intercept Tanaka's supply run and destroy his ships in order to accelerate the Japanese collapse on Guadalcanal. At its helm is Rear Admiral Carlton H. Wright. His force packs impressive firepower. His flagship, Minneapolis, 3 other heavy cruisers, New Orleans, Pensacola, and Northampton, plus the light cruiser Honolulu, and 4 Fletcher-class destroyers, Fletcher, Perkins, Drayton, and Maury. However, having taken command just 2 days ago, Wright has barely met his captains, let alone conducted joint exercises with them. But they're pressed for time. Wright's ships will need to maintain nearly 28 knots throughout the journey if they are to reach the waters off Guadalcanal before Tanaka can make the supply drop. 6 hours into their journey, as they plow through the dark waters of the Solomon Sea, radio operators aboard the Fletcher-class destroyers at the front of the formation run practice sweeps, testing the equipment that they hope will give them the critical edge in the coming night battle. Commander William M. Cole, aboard the destroyer Fletcher, has particular confidence in his ship's new SG radar system. Unlike the massive cruisers, the destroyers rely on stealth, speed, and the element of surprise. Cole knows that spotting the enemy first will be essential. The approach. Task Force 67 moves steadily through Lengo Channel, the narrow passage between Guadalcanal and Florida Islands. Even with radar assistance, navigating these waters at night is perilous. The Americans have no charts showing underwater obstacles, and a grounding could prove disastrous. By 10:25 p.m., the force has cleared the channel. But now, matters are complicated by an unexpected development. The destroyers Lamson and Lardner, returning from convoy escort duty to Guadalcanal, are ordered to join Task Force 67. There's no time for Wright to brief their commanding officers on his battle plan, so he assigns them a position at the rear of the cruiser column. Meanwhile, Tanaka's destroyers have taken a circuitous route to avoid Allied reconnaissance aircraft. They first headed northeast through Bougainville Strait, before turning southeast and then south through Indispensable Strait. Despite these precautions, an Australian coast watcher on southern Bougainville spots their departure and radios a warning to American forces. The night is exceptionally dark, with the sky completely overcast, no moon, and visibility limited to less than 2 miles. The inky blackness that shrouded Iron Bottom Sound, a name earned by the numerous sunken ships that lay beneath its surface, will work to the advantage of whichever force detects the enemy first. At 11:06 p.m., Task Force 67 is proceeding along the northwestern coast of Guadalcanal when the SG radar operator aboard Minneapolis detects what he describes as, quote, a small wart on Cape Esperance. The blip grows larger until it detaches itself from the landmass. Admiral Wright immediately informs his force of the radar contact. More blips soon appear on the screen, eventually revealing 7 Japanese ships approaching from the direction of Savo Island. Battle begins. Tanaka's destroyers reach their destination, slowing to 12 knots as they approach the unloading area. The Admiral positions Takanami about 1 mile seaward to screen the column, while the other ships prepare to drop their supply drums. Aboard Fletcher, Commander William Cole's radar team also detects enemy vessels, bearing 285 degrees at 14,000 yards. They track the formation and determine it's moving at 15 knots on a course of 140 degrees. At 11:16 p.m., as the enemy formation bears 243 degrees at a range of 7,000 yards, an optimal firing position, Cole requests permission from Admiral Wright to launch torpedoes. Wright waits 2 crucial minutes before responding with the message, quote, range on bogies excessive at present. Cole replies that the range is fine, but another 2 minutes pass before Wright finally grants permission to fire. By then, the Japanese ships have moved from an optimal firing position to a marginal one, giving American torpedoes a long, difficult chase to reach their targets. At 11:20 p.m., Fletcher, Perkins, and Drayton fire a total of 20 Mark 15 torpedoes toward Tanaka's ships. Mori, lacking SG radar and unable to establish contact with the enemy, withholds fire. Almost simultaneously, Wright orders his cruisers to open fire. At 11:21 p.m., Minneapolis launches her first salvo, quickly followed by the other American cruisers. The destroyers fire star shells to illuminate the targets as ordered, then increase speed to clear the area for the cruisers to operate. As American shells begin to fall, the waters around Takanami erupt with violent splashes. Positioned as the screen for Tanaka's column, the Japanese destroyer finds herself caught in the crossfire. Illuminated by the star shells fired from Task Force 67's destroyers, she becomes the focal point for the combined firepower of its cruisers. Takanami tries to defend herself with gunfire, but she cannot hold out for long. American shells systematically demolish her superstructure, puncture her hull, and ignite fires throughout the ship. Within minutes, she is ablaze from stem to stern, her engines disabled and communications shattered. The destroyer division commander, Captain Toshio Shimizu, along with the ship's captain, Commander Masumi Ogura, continue directing the battle, even as their vessel burns around them. Despite their best efforts, Takanami is knocked out of the fight before long. Hidden threat. The Americans claim first blood and confidently prepare for more. Unbeknownst to Wright and his men, before Takanami was incapacitated, she managed to launch 8 Type 93 torpedoes, which are now hurtling toward them through the depths. The rest of the Japanese vessels have taken advantage of Task Force 67's focus on Takanami to maneuver and successfully dodge the American torpedoes, none of which find their mark. Tanaka's flagship, Naganami, swings hard to starboard in a tight turn, her guns flashing in the darkness as she pours thick smoke from her stern, creating a protective curtain. Simultaneously, Kawakaze and Suzukaze pivot in the opposite direction, their bows knifing through the black water as they turn to port. At 11:23 p.m., Suzukaze lets her 8 long-lance torpedoes rip, joining those already unleashed by Takanami before her demise. The muzzle flashes from Wright's cruisers make them easy targets against the night sky. Further ahead, the 4 lead Japanese destroyers maintain their course along Guadalcanal's coastline, allowing the American column to steam past in the opposite direction. Their captains wait patiently for the perfect moment. Once they clear the burning Takanami, Kurashio and Oyashio fire their own torpedoes. 4 from the former, 8 from the latter, before sharply reversing course and surging to full speed. Naganami and Kawakaze complete the trap at 11:32 and 33 respectively, each launching 8 more torpedoes toward the American formation. The tables turn. The sea is now alive with 44 Japanese torpedoes converging on Wright's cruisers, which continue on their predictable course and speed, their crews entirely unaware of the approaching danger. Minneapolis, still firing confidently at what her gunners believe are crippled enemy vessels, pumps out her 9th salvo. Admiral Wright is just preparing to order a course change when disaster strikes. At 11:27, 2 torpedoes slam into the flagship's forward half. The concussive force of the first explosion rips through the aviation fuel storage tanks ahead of Turret 1, igniting a massive fireball that illuminates the entire ship. Seconds later, the second torpedo detonates against her port side, flooding 3 of the ship's 4 fire rooms. Massive sheets of water tower over the port side so high that they partially extinguish the raging fires on the forecastle when they crash back down. The damage is catastrophic. Minneapolis's entire bow forward of Turret 1 buckles, folding downward at a sickening 70-degree angle. It dangles from the rest of the hull like a broken limb. Power fails throughout the vessel as she shudders and rolls drunkenly from side to side. In an instant, 37 lives have been claimed, and Wright's flagship is effectively knocked out of the battle. Less than 60 seconds after Minneapolis is struck, New Orleans suffers an even more catastrophic blow. A long-range torpedo slams into her port side, directly abreast of Turret 1, detonating with terrifying force. The explosion rips through her forward ammunition magazines and aviation fuel storage. The blast is so powerful it completely severs the cruiser's bow forward of Turret 2. The massive section twists violently to port as it tears free. Herbert Brown, a seaman in the ship's plotting room, later described the horrific scene, quote, "I had to see. I walked alongside the silent Turret 2 and was stopped by a lifeline stretched from the outboard port lifeline to the side of the turret. Thank God it was there. For one more step, and I would have pitched headfirst into the dark water 30 feet below. The bow was gone. 125 feet of ship and number 1 main battery turret with 3 8-inch guns were gone. 1,800 tons of ship were gone. Oh my God. All those guys I went through boot camp with. All gone." Attack on Pensacola. The American formation is now in chaos, with 2 cruisers crippled and burning. But the Japanese torpedoes continue their hunt. Pensacola follows next in the cruiser column. Captain Frank L. Lowe, witnessing Minneapolis and New Orleans taking devastating hits and slowing, makes a fateful decision. Instead of following Honolulu's example and passing to starboard, Pensacola swings to port to avoid colliding with the stricken vessels ahead. This maneuver inadvertently silhouettes her against the burning wrecks of the 2 forward cruisers, making her a perfect target. At 11:39 p.m., a torpedo fired by Oyashio strikes Pensacola abreast her mainmast. The explosion rips away her port outer drive shaft and ruptures her fuel tanks. The effect is catastrophic. Blazing oil erupts from the wound, spraying across the main deck and pouring throughout the ship's interior. The force of the blast sends fuel as high as the maintop, transforming the mainmast into a blazing torch. The men stationed in control aft are instantly taken by the intense heat and flames. As a wall of flame engulfs the cruiser's midsection, damage control teams scramble to respond. Much of the fire hose on deck catches fire itself, and by the time the remaining lines are connected, the flames are so intense they cannot be extinguished. The concussion and inferno claim 125 lives in mere moments as Pensacola takes a sharp 13-degree list to port. The primary steering controls on the bridge fail completely. Power fluctuates throughout the vessel, and normal communication systems go dark. The water level rises in the aft fire room, while flooded magazines and fires render Turret 3 useless. Executive Officer Commander Harry Keeler Jr. takes decisive action. With the main steering station inoperable, he shifts control to the emergency steering position at the ship's stern, known as steering aft. Using telephone relays through Central Station, the only communication pathway still functioning, Keeler establishes a tenuous command link. From there, he personally directs the ship's movement by voice commands. Despite the devastating damage, they manage to maintain about 8 knots of speed from the single remaining functional shaft. Sealing the victory. Honolulu, fourth in the American line, is the only U.S. ship to respond effectively to the unfolding disaster. Her captain makes a critical decision to pass Minneapolis and New Orleans to starboard, away from the burning wrecks. Simultaneously, he orders an increase in flank speed of 30 knots and executes a series of radical maneuvers. These quick, decisive actions allow Honolulu to transit the danger zone without taking damage, all while maintaining fire at the rapidly disappearing Japanese destroyers. Trailing at the rear of the American cruiser column, Northampton follows Honolulu's lead, steering to starboard to bypass the 3 crippled cruisers ahead. But unlike Honolulu, Captain Willard A. Kitts makes a critical error, maintaining steady speed and course rather than executing evasive maneuvers. The Japanese torpedoes, still hunting through the dark waters, find their 5th target. At 11:48 p.m., just as Northampton returns to the base course, 2 torpedoes from Kamikaze slam into her port side. The first strikes 10 feet below the waterline, directly adjacent to the aft engine room. The second torpedo hits just 40 feet further aft, delivering a devastating 1-2 punch. Seawater crashes through the ruptured hull, flooding an engine room within seconds. 3 of the cruiser's 4 propeller shafts grind to a halt, and the ship immediately takes a 10-degree list to port. Fires erupt across her midsection, spreading rapidly as fuel oil ignites. Captain Kitts initially stops the engines, hoping the ship might right herself, but the list continues to worsen, reaching 23 degrees. Recognizing the inevitable, he orders the bridge abandoned, the fire room secured, and all personnel brought topside. The ship's list increases to an alarming 35 degrees before Kitts finally orders the salvage crew to abandon ship as well. 50 crew members perish in the attack, with hundreds left struggling for survival in the oil-slicked waters. The battle's end. At 11:44 p.m., Rear Admiral Tanaka orders his ships to break contact and withdraw from the battle area. Victory is secured. There's no need to risk his destroyers any longer. As Tanaka's ships steam north along Guadalcanal's darkened coastline, Kurashio and Kagero unleash a final volley of 8 torpedoes toward the American formation. These last weapons slice harmlessly through the water, missing their targets. But by now, the damage has been done. Meanwhile, Honolulu's commander, Rear Admiral Malin S. Tisdale, has only just learned that he's now in charge. At 12:01 a.m., a full 28 minutes after Wright issued the order, Tisdale receives the message, transferring command of what remains of Task Force 67. At the rear of Wright's formation, the 2 destroyers added at the last minute, Lamson and Lardner, now find themselves in a nightmarish situation. Unable to locate any Japanese targets in the darkness and confusion, they attempt to exit the battle area to the east. Suddenly, machine guns from the badly damaged New Orleans open fire on them, mistaking the American destroyers for Japanese vessels. The destroyers quickly flash recognition signals and withdraw from the friendly fire. At the same time, Commander Cole's 4 van destroyers, having initially retired from the battle area, race at full speed in a complete circle around Savo Island. They return to the Sound, eager to rejoin the fight, only to discover that they're too late. The coast is now clear for Tanaka to send Oyashio and Kurashio to search for Takanami. She has failed to respond to repeated radio calls, and now the Japanese admiral fears the worst. Just after 1 a.m. on December 1st, the 2 destroyers locate Takanami. She's ablaze from stem to stern, the only Japanese warship struck by American gunfire during the entire engagement. Her silhouette glows eerily against the night sky, illuminating the waters around her with flickering amber light. Oyashio and Kurashio approach cautiously, preparing to rescue survivors. But their sonar operators detect American warships nearby, likely the returning destroyer group that had circled Savo Island. Unwilling to risk further casualties, the Japanese captains reluctantly abandon the rescue mission. The 2 destroyers slip away into the darkness, rejoining Tanaka's formation for the long journey home. 10 hours later, the victorious Japanese force reaches the safety of the Shortland Islands, having delivered a crushing blow to the U.S. Navy. Aftermath. 4 American cruisers now lie crippled off Tassafaronga Point. Northampton is in her final throes, the situation on board deteriorating rapidly. Despite heroic damage control efforts, her list increases to a dangerous 23 degrees. Captain Kitts stops the engines, hoping this might allow the ship to right herself, but the angle continues to worsen. At 1:30 a.m., With the cruiser clearly doomed, Kitts orders all hands except a small salvage team to abandon ship. 20 minutes later, Fletcher and Drayton, which had circled around Savo Island during the battle, receive orders to rescue Northampton's survivors. The destroyers approach cautiously, lowering boats and throwing lines to the hundreds of oil-slicked sailors now struggling in the dark waters. Seaman Jenkins of Fletcher swims over 100 yards multiple times, carrying lines to shipwrecked sailors too weak to reach the rescue vessels. Aboard Drayton, Ensign Ryan repeatedly plunges into the sea to help exhausted men into the whaleboat. Fletcher manages to pull 42 officers and more than 600 men from the water. As the rescue operation continues, Northampton's list reaches 35 degrees. At 2:40 a.m., Captain Kitts and the salvage party finally abandon the agonizing ship. 20 minutes later, she rolls onto her beam ends, then plunges stern first into the depths, becoming the newest addition to the growing ship graveyard of Iron Bottom Sound. Meanwhile, the radar on board Admiral Tisdale's Honolulu locates 4 ships off the northern coast of Savo Island. Initially fearing they might be Japanese, Tisdale is relieved to learn they are Cole's 4 destroyers. He orders them to search for the damaged cruisers, while Honolulu continues hunting for any remaining enemy vessels. As night gives way to morning, the 3 damaged but surviving cruisers fight their own battles against flooding and fire. Minneapolis, her bow completely folded down at a 70-degree angle, limps toward Tulagi at barely 3 knots. Captain Rosendahl had initially set course for Lunga Point, planning to beach her if necessary, but as her condition stabilizes slightly, he decides the ship can make the longer journey to Tulagi. New Orleans presents an even more startling sight. With her entire bow missing forward of Turret 2, her forward decks end in a jagged, twisted mass of metal open to the sea. By some miracle of damage control and design, watertight compartments hold, and she maintains a speed of 5 knots towards Sanctuary. Pensacola's ordeal continues well into the morning. Fires rage throughout her midsection, fed by ruptured fuel tanks. For 12 excruciating hours, her crew battles the inferno before finally gaining control. With 9 knots of speed possible from her remaining functional shaft, she follows her sister ships toward Tulagi. By daylight, the tug Bobolink and several PT boats emerge from Tulagi to assist Minneapolis. New Orleans follows, guided in by the destroyer Maury, which then moors alongside her since the cruiser has no anchors remaining. Pensacola arrives last, her deck still smoldering. By now, the cost of the battle becomes clear. 19 American officers and 398 enlisted men have lost their lives. Hundreds more suffer from burns, shock, and exposure. 1 American cruiser has been sunk, with 3 more bearing serious damage that will take months to repair. Perhaps unsurprisingly, the Americans struggle to accept that they'd been dealt such a serious blow by a smaller Japanese unit, and attempt to put the best possible face on the disaster. Wright's after-action report claims his force sank 4 Japanese destroyers and damaged 2 others, when in reality, the only loss for Tanaka's force had been that of Takanami. Lessons learned. Samuel Eliot Morrison, the U.S. Navy's official historian, cuts to the heart of what made the battle such a stunning reversal, writing, quote, "It is a painful truth that the Battle of Tassafaronga was a sharp defeat inflicted on an alert and superior cruiser force by a partially surprised and inferior destroyer force." Meanwhile, Rear Admiral Samuel J. Cox, modern director of the Naval History and Heritage Command, places Tassafaronga alongside the Battle of Savo Island as 2 of the worst defeats in U.S. naval history, behind only Pearl Harbor. As the Americans attempt to work out what went so wrong and develop plans to avoid such humiliating losses in the future, Chester Nimitz, Commander-in-Chief of the Pacific Fleet, distills the harsh lessons into a single phrase, quote, "Training, training, and more training." Though correct in one sense, his assessment overlooks the technological deficiencies that contributed to the defeat. In particular, the poor performance of the American Mark 15 torpedoes compared with the excellent power, range, and lack of visible wake of their Japanese Type 93 Longlands counterparts. Indeed, the Americans remain unaware of the true capabilities of Japanese torpedoes. Admiral Wright, unable to believe torpedoes could have struck his ships from such distances, suggests that submarines must have been involved in the attack. Not until mid-1943 will the U.S. Navy finally acknowledge the serious problems with their own torpedoes and fully recognize the superiority of the Longlands. Yet the disaster at Tassafaronga also prompts urgent discussion throughout the Pacific Fleet about changes in tactical doctrine and technical improvements. Lieutenant Commander Joseph C. Wiley, Jr., Fletcher's executive officer, soon leads the development of the first Combat Information Center handbook for destroyers, standardizing the tactical use of radar in battle. Commander Arleigh Burke, who would later lead American destroyers to victory at the battles of Empress Augusta Bay and Cape St. George, carefully studies Cole's experience at Tassafaronga. Taking a direct lesson from Wright's fatal hesitation, he establishes standing orders that instruct destroyers to, quote, attack the enemy on first contact without awaiting orders from Task Force Commander. Similarly, Commander Frederick Moosbrugger applies lessons from Tassafaronga when planning the Battle of Vella Gulf. There, he withholds gunfire until American torpedoes are observed hitting enemy ships, preventing the Japanese from detecting the attack until it's too late. Meanwhile, the loss of the 3 Rogers brothers, who all served aboard New Orleans, coming just 2 weeks after the 5 Sullivan brothers met a similar fate on Juneau, leads directly to the sole survivor policy, preventing family members from serving together in combat areas. For the Japanese, despite their victory in battle, Tassafaronga represents the last major attempt to reinforce troops on Guadalcanal by surface ships. Though Tanaka makes several more supply runs in December, these prove increasingly ineffective. On December 12th, Tanaka loses his flagship, Teruzuki, and is himself wounded and subsequently relieved of command. By the end of December, the Imperial General Headquarters concludes that Guadalcanal cannot be held. Emperor Hirohito himself approves the evacuation plan, and between February 2nd and 7th, 1943, the Japanese withdraw the remaining forces, conceding the island to the Allies. The Battle of Tassafaronga may represent a terrible loss for the United States, but the lessons learned from defeat undoubtedly played a part in forging the naval dominance that eventually secured victory in the Pacific.